Welcome to Syncreate. This is a show where we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. We believe everyone is creative, and our goal is to demystify the creative process and expand the boundaries of what it means to be creative. I'm Melinda Rothaus, and I help individuals and organizations bring their creative dreams and visions to life. So very, very delighted to have with me today Jamie Gallagher. Welcome, Jamie.
Hey, nice to be here, Melinda. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled that we get to have this chat. And so we recently met at the Florida Creativity Conference where you were the keynote speaker and really enjoyed your talk on leadership and creativity and just, a little bit about your background. So you were at Lego for 15 years and then at Playmobil for 4 years. And then most recently, 20 years at Faber-Castell USA, leading that division. And so, to my mind, you've just had this really quite extraordinary career leading creative organizations. And I think part of the reason I loved your talk so much is because this is really a core interest of mine as well. I do leadership development work. For my doctoral research, I was looking at team creativity and collaboration in organizations. So, I'm curious. I know that you have kind of some bullet points that you really highlight on how to best foster creativity in organizations. So maybe we can kind of start there. So when you talk to people about how best to foster creativity and innovation in organizations, what are the top things to look out for?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you point out, and it's one of those things where, I kind of semi-retired a year ago, and all of a sudden, when you go from the type of cadence and routine that I and many, many people like me had, during your work life, where time is so precious, you don't really have the time that you probably should have taken to reflect. But then all of a sudden, you do have that amount of time.
Yeah.
You start to look back on your career and things that you've done. And the one thing that is always interesting to me is I worked for these 3 really special, outstanding companies whose output was creative products.
Yes.
So clearly Lego, Playmobil, Faber-Castell in terms of art materials and writing instruments and those types of products. But all of these companies, what they had in common were, first of all, they all did really high quality creative materials. So instantly people assumed and would talk to me about these being creative organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And what instantly came to me then was, well, just because a company makes or doesn't make a creative product doesn't necessitate that that's a creative organization. And that was the lesson that I found over my career was, we were not always, as an organization across all departments, our best creative selves all the time, even though our output and the product that we made, and in fact was. So when I look at a creative organization and begin the discussion of that, I try and break it down really simply to mindset and environment.
Yeah.
And in order to have a truly creative organization, my experience has been you've got to enter the discussion. You've got to come into the building every day. You've got to walk into that and that environment with somewhat of a creative mindset, which largely is governed by being open.
Yes. Openness to
walk into that environment,
experience.
openness. Exactly.
Yes.
You've got to be open to other people, what's going to happen. You've got to be open to all these things. And then the second piece of that truly is that the environment that you're walking into has got to be an environment that is conducive to creativity. And that is one that, once again, is largely open, but is truly founded on the basis of trust.
Yes.
So it's about openness in terms of mindset, There's a whole set of skills and things to go with that creative mindset, but then also an environment that is largely governed by and has a foundation of trust.
I agree. And that was one of the big findings in my own research as well, that, if you want to bring people together in teams to do creative work, there has to be that sense of rapport, that sense of connection, the ability and willingness to take risks and know that that is acceptable and,
Yes,
part of the process. And that, just that we communicate openly, we're authentic, we're honest, and we can trust each other.
yeah. And Melinda, that's so interesting when we speak to younger people, sometimes university students who appropriately so are being channeled into doing a lot of group work. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
work groups and a lot of group work that's being done
Hmm.
in universities right now. And even in those groups, I talk to students about the output of that group, the collective creativity and output of that group will largely be determined by, did you start and engender trust within that group?
Hmm.
Because as you so well know, if that is a group that has an element of fear or distrust, then the full creative potential and ideation of that group and all the smart ideas and all the wonderful contributions that those students can make to one another in that group will never see the light of day, because they will in fact hold back.
Yes, right. And maybe good ideas won't get shared, or people will be afraid if they're going to be shot down, then they're not going to speak up. And sometimes, the quietest person has a great idea that may or may not get heard.
Exactly. Which is why when we talk about creative leaders may not always be the strongest ideators, but they may in fact be very skilled at getting that quiet person to step into the conversation and to
Mhm.
share their ideas, just so they're getting the maximum collective input from the group.
For sure. So that really brings us, I think, to the question of, as a leader of an organization or a team, how can you best bring out the creativity of the group? So we definitely trust is a big part of it. But what else in your experience comes into the equation?
I was having a conversation with this the other day, and for some reason, what kept coming up was the idea of courage.
Yeah.
Because so much of what is expected these days of a leader, of a CEO, is the delivery of traditional standard business metrics for success.
Mm,
And a lot of those, like it or not, happen to be geared toward the short term.
yeah.
So it's the short term profit, it's the short term sales growth. And to stand in the face of that and say, we're going to take a risk, we're going to take a chance, and we're going to commit to each other that we're going to own this, whether it works or not, because we know that we have to be creative in terms of innovating and looking toward the future.
Hmm.
There's this element of courage. And even if intellectually we know that creativity is an important and critical factor in our success in the future, even if intellectually we know that, emotionally, it still takes the courage to say, we're going to take that chance because we believe that ultimately this will get us where we need to go. Or if it doesn't, we'll learn from it, apply it, and then that will get us to where we need to go.
Yeah, such an important point, because I think you're right. Creativity is such a buzzword these days, right? And so many organizations kind of say that they value creativity, whereas, in the day to day, that may not actually be happening. And so, how do you work with leaders that want to, embrace creativity more and take that courageous step, that risk? How do you kind of support them in doing that?
I think one of the key things with that uh, becomes the idea that you don't need to start big. It
Yeah.
doesn't need the be all and everything. It in fact is sometimes better to begin by taking, whether it's a pilot program or test or example,
Mhm.
and work our way up to that, so
Mhm.
that we're able to find success and build upon that success. Or if in fact, and maybe even more importantly, if we don't immediately find success, then we do find a way to say, but here is what we learned, and
Yes.
here is how we will now apply that. But
Mhm.
if we do it on a scale that is such that, we're not falling from a very high point, then if we succeed, then we use it to build upon. And if we don't have immediate success, then we are able to use it in a different way, and it doesn't really be deemed as it is oftentimes, hey, we tried that already and it didn't work.
Mhm.
Yes, we used to do that, but we don't do that anymore. And you live to fight another day, and you live to grow and foster and incubate that type of creativity. So leaders who are able to grasp that and find ways to do that in the everyday work, then they usually have much greater success than those who go all in and then pull all out because it just
Right.
didn't work.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that brings up so many things, the importance of kind of iteration and prototyping, that more entrepreneurial mindset of like, okay, let's try something, let's test it out, let's refine it, let's keep playing with it until we find the right thing. That holds true in large organizations as well as in, startups and things like that. Yeah. Yeah, and even
That's
just
also why when you look at the popular view of innovation, and I think this is why they say oftentimes it's more successful to pull that out of the core business,
yeah,
pull that out of the
right.
everyday work, and
Mhm.
and build that, whether it's skunkworks or whether it's treated as a startup, but pull it out of
Mhm.
that environment and bring it into its own environment, so that you don't have that struggle and that everyday conflict of, well, this is my real job, and then have this on the side.
Yes, right, and more organizations are doing that and bringing that more kinda entrepreneurial spirit in a sort of test environment, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So I'm curious, just, based on the wealth of experience that you've had in these different companies and organizations over the years, kind of some lessons learned, like what really works well in terms of leadership for creativity and innovation and what doesn't.
So that again, it's almost not till you kind of get off the proverbial treadmill and start looking back.
Mhm.
And in my case, looking to not just stop and do nothing, but to kind of look to now share and help.
Yes.
So when I took that time to determine how could I share and help, and what would I use to share and help others, I decided that there were really four things that I see as being what I call accelerants. So
Yeah.
some people may call them key factors, some people may call them key strategies. But in my view, I think there are four accelerants that will propel the success of businesses, but also success in a way that there's an element of human fulfillment that goes with it.
Hmm.
So if I could, those four accelerants that I see are purpose, culture, creativity, and clarity.
Mhm.
So those four accelerants, I believe that if they can be intentionally integrated into your business planning, your strategic planning, if those can be intentionally integrated upfront, then the likelihood of a business being able to sustain and succeed is much greater. So why would that be? So if we look at purpose, first of all, purpose is a tremendous way of uniting and aligning
Mhm.
people. It is in any given day. It's stepping back and saying, okay, wait a minute now. What are we here for anyway?
Why are
What
we
are we
doing
really
this?
trying to do? It's kind of
Yeah.
the Simon Sinek, what is our
Mhm.
why? So purpose is
Exactly.
absolutely critical. If we move to the idea of culture, we spend a lot of time in the workplace, and therefore the environment or the culture, which is really just a collection of committed behaviors.
Mhm.
So that culture becomes really important. As you had mentioned earlier, if you have a culture that values collaboration,
Mhm.
that values the idea of maximizing collective impact,
Mhm.
then you're going to have a much different result than a culture that espouses, me, not we. So culture
Definitely.
becomes a really important piece.
Mhm.
Creativity is the third accelerant. We're talking about that. But in essence, these days, creativity in a business can be anything from, hey, look, we've got some things that we need to fix, and therefore we need creative solutions.
Mhm.
Or it could be, we need some new things. We need some new ideas that have value. So we need those new ideas that have value, which is in essence creativity. So
Mhm.
creativity becomes the third accelerant. And then the fourth accelerant is clarity. And clarity is a situation where that runs the gamut from, performance management in terms of, the the traditional nightmare is waiting to do a performance appraisal once a year and
Right.
scrambling 2 days before that appraisal is due and to be
Mhm.
delivered and trying to think of all the things that somebody did
Mhm.
over the course of a year, as opposed to having clarity on a regular basis. Hey, what do you expect from me and what do I expect from you? So clarity in
Yes.
terms of expectations, and also trying to resist, and it's difficult these days, but the clarity accelerant also entails trying to really push back on this glorification of busyness,
Yes.
that people, feel that they really need to be busy, and if they've got a full plate plus more, they've essentially satisfied the task. Whereas truly, what we need right now is we need kind of a fewer, better. I think I had mentioned when you and I were in Florida at the conference,
Mhm.
a deeper work element where we're doing fewer things, but we're doing them at a really high level. That's the future of work. So, in essence, it's those four accelerants that I've reflected upon. And now I share those with individuals, I share those with communities, I share those with students, I share those with companies and organizations, just as a way to begin their thinking and begin their
Mhm.
strategic planning.
Yeah, I love that, and so much good stuff here that I want to pick up on. This idea of the deep work and having time for the deep work, and that being the future of work. So, given that we realize that this busyness paradigm is not very useful and it leads to burnout and it lowers productivity. So, how do you envision organizations making that? Because that is also a cultural element. Like, are
Yeah.
we just like constantly overscheduled and everything? Or like, how can organizations shift that mindset?
First of all, it's astounding to me how difficult this is.
Yes.
And you use the term cultural. It is absolutely cultural, I think, and becoming more so in the society of professionals,
Mhm.
but even within companies. And we went through this at Faber-Castell. Uh, the opportunity to go to people and say to them, I think you need to take something off your plate.
Mm.
It was a really difficult thing for people to let go
Right.
of something and to work on fewer things, even though deep down they might believe, if I had fewer things on my plate, I could probably do a better job at those things that remain on my plate. And
Mhm.
ultimately, if we all approach it this way, we would have much greater productivity and a greater outcome. So the idea of how do we do this? How do we get people to do this? It's a relentless push for prioritizing and tying those priorities to outcomes.
Mhm.
And I say this when I talk to people about creativity. Believe it or not, there is this idea of we need as leaders, we need to model that. by
Yes.
not being so swamped and scattered. And I
Mhm.
began, probably my last 5 years at Faber-Castell, I stopped using the word busy,
Mm,
and I stopped using the words swamped, overwhelmed,
right.
beyond full plate. I tried to model a different way of looking at my workload,
Mhm.
and to try and do it that way, and really push people to do the same and keep coming back to priorities, what's most important, and give them that permission, if you will, to let go of some of these things.
Yes, it's so important because in my experience, some of the organizations I work with, it's the leader, it's the CEO that's driving that culture of busyness, whether it's a startup and, well, we got to get funding. We were promising our funders all these things that maybe they're a little unrealistic, but we're just
Yes.
driving, right? Or things like that. So, I think you're right. It has to be modeled. And then there's also, different folks I'm working with right now, maybe there's a hiring freeze or maybe they're understaffed in some way. And so, sometimes people are having to cover multiple roles because someone left and the position wasn't backfilled or things like that. And so it almost feels impossible. And it's like, okay, if we want to take this off someone's plate, like it's got to go onto someone else's plate.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so what I also see with a lot of my leadership clients is, even though we say you really should be taking time to step back and think strategically and, really think about your vision going forward, people are so often just in the weeds
Yeah.
that they feel like they don't have time to do that, even though it's actually essential.
And not only is it essential, but if we look out into the future, there's a real concern that the nature of the work that has people in the weeds,
Mhm.
it's that type of work that is most susceptible to technology or
Yes.
something else doing that work.
Right.
And as you and I are terming it, from the Cal Newport book, Deep Work, it's the deeper work, the
Mhm.
deeper thinking that in fact will be needed and be left to us
Yeah.
as technology develops. So we're not
Mhm.
really doing anybody any favors to keep pushing this long to-do list of
Mhm.
clerical type of work, whatever administrative type work, whatever that might be, task work,
Mhm.
uh, without over time and gradually developing people and developing that comfort level, that mindset, and that skill set for deeper work.
Yes, I love that. And one of the things that I often talk with clients about is, how are you mentoring and developing your people, your teams, and it's more than just managing people's workflows or things like that. It's like, really taking the time to ask them, what are their goals? Where do they want to be in 5 years? How can I, as a leader, support you and to really just understand that part of leadership is really mentoring and developing your people to maximize their own potential.
You know what's interesting is I don't think we ever fully hit our stride on the type of behavior and leadership that you're speaking about until we got into COVID.
Uh-huh.
And it was so
Interesting.
interesting because during COVID, what used to be a rhetorical question, which was, how are you doing? How's it
Mm.
going?
Mhm.
That and not in a malicious way, but that in that somewhat of a rhetorical question,
Mhm.
all of a sudden became a very meaningful, purposeful,
Genuine.
intentional, genuine, and authentic question. And that I found with the one-on-ones that we were doing with our
Mhm.
staff,
Mhm.
that then propelled us into bigger topics, starting bigger goals, purpose, how's it going, how's it making you feel, and we really took on kind of a different view of this. There was a different filter and a different flavor of it, and in a very helpful and authentic way.
Yeah. And how did that change sort of the tenor of things when you started asking more? Because to me, again, that relates very much directly back to trust. If you feel that your
Exactly.
leaders honestly care about you and your well-being, well, then of course you're going to be more inclined to
Exactly.
show up.
And as you know, what that also does, because it's a fundamental component of building that trust, is it shows a level of vulnerability on the part of the leader that's necessary to build this trust. So if not
Yes.
only am I sincerely and authentically and genuinely asking how you're doing, but I'm also sharing how I'm doing,
Mhm.
then you've got now a vulnerability in a relationship that
Mhm.
maybe we had not had before, might not have had
Yes.
before, that's allowing then for this trust to open up.
Mhm.
And with that foundation, okay, now we're having meaningful conversations about the business. We're ideating in a way maybe we hadn't before, and
Mhm.
heaven knows that we had plenty of issues and challenges and problems that we were facing during the pandemic, and it allowed us to approach those maybe in a little bit different way than we would have before.
Mhm. And do you feel like people are, carrying that forward beyond the, immediate pandemic?
I would say not all of it. I think it's like when we ever find ourselves in a critical situation, we have a behavioral change,
Mhm.
and then many times we kind of go back to what we used to do, what was comfortable for us, what we knew. So I think
Yeah.
there's elements of that. Certainly the definition of health has changed to hopefully forever to
Yes.
encompass not just physical health, not just whether you tested positive or not for COVID, but
Mhm.
also encompassing the whole mental, emotional, and social health
Yeah.
aspect. I think that at least my experience has been that has changed, and that's a really healthy thing. The challenge becomes, people who inevitably go back to what they were doing before, the tactics, the to-do list, and those things. That's been a bit of a difference. And then
Yeah.
it's hard to say because on top of all of that, we certainly have a change in the workplace, whether it's remote or hybrid or in
Mhm.
the office, which is a bit different than we had to deal with prior.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, but I think you're right. Even just that mental health conversation, I think it's really because of the pandemic made its way, into the general societal conversation and then, into organizations. It just seems like there's a lot more support programs
Yeah.
and, resources available for
Yeah,
that.
which is absolutely a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, if you can think of a particular example or case study, kind of using some of these things that we've talked about purpose, culture, creativity, clarity, where you've seen an organization either that you've been involved with or maybe observed really successfully pivot, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, I'm real curious about that.
So the best example I can give, and it's obviously it's an example that I lived with and lived through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not sure a lot of our listeners are aware of Faber-Castell, but Faber-Castell is a family-owned eighth generation German company that 265 years ago uh, produced the first pencils
Mm-hmm.
over in Bavaria, over in Nuremberg, Germany, and forever and ever did pencils, finest quality pencils and writing instruments and art materials and art pencils. Well, the journey that we took with that business was, here we were in many ways a pencil company, a writing instrument company in a digital age.
Yes.
And strategically, we had to step back and ask ourselves whether being as they would call it over in Europe, a stationary products company,
Mm.
whether we should be a stationary products company in a digital age. That allowed us, and this now begins to speak to the purpose, that allowed us or caused us to step back and say, okay, what is our why?
Mm-hmm.
What are we here for?
Yeah.
So the case study or the example or the experience I had really begins quite powerfully with our re-examining and restating our why.
Mm-hmm.
And as a company, in a very inclusive manner, we reignited our why, and that why became the belief that we could enrich people's lives, and we could do that uniquely through creativity and self-expression.
Mm-hmm.
So here now you had this 260-year-old German pencil company
Right.
was now a company that said, yep, we make pencils and we make darn good ones, no doubt
Mm-hmm.
about it. But what we really do is we enrich people's lives.
Mm.
And we do that whether they're children, whether they're parents, whether they're teachers, whether they're fallen away creatives, whether they're seniors, whether they're post-war vets. We truly enrich people's lives. And we do that in the way that we feel we can do it best. And that's through creativity and
Mm-hmm.
self-expression.
Mm-hmm.
So now you take this rejuvenated, reignited esprit de corps purpose or
Mm-hmm.
why, and now it starts to flow from there. So you've got purpose. That purpose immediately was flowing into a culture,
Mm-hmm.
and that culture was the culture of trust, of collaboration. We became a better team and more collaborative. We were able to have, which was an incredibly beneficial byproduct of this, we were able to have tougher, important discussions
Mm.
as a group because of the culture we created. The creativity aspect of that story was such that we had always, and I think I mentioned this to you and you saw this when we were at the conference in Florida, when people think of creativity in organization, especially one like ours, they immediately thought, okay, they're talking about the marketing people and they're talking about the
Right.
product development people,
Yeah.
maybe some people who do packaging. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
those are the creatives.
Mm-hmm.
Well, during the supply chain difficulty that we had about 3 years ago now, the most creative people that we needed were creative problem solvers within supply chain.
Yeah.
So this why, this culture change, this creativity opened up permission and the need for our operations, logistics, and purchasing people
Mm-hmm.
to become the most creative people in the company.
Right.
And
Right.
they helped us navigate the challenges of getting product into the country,
Mm-hmm.
rerouting shipments, doing all these different things, using rail, using any means possible
Mm-hmm.
to get inventory. So they became the most creative people within the company, and fortunately so. And then lastly, the clarity part was when we would do our annual planning, more and more so, we went from, okay, we have 7 priorities. Hey, we went from 7 to 5 to 4, back up to 6, by the way,
Uh-huh.
then back down to a manageable level
Mm-hmm.
of this idea of, okay, we can trust each other. We're very clear on who we are and what we do. We tie that clarity to our purpose. And it became I would say, a tighter, more efficient, more successful, but also, and I mentioned this earlier, a more fulfilled team
Mm.
of people
Mm-hmm.
than we had been before.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe in this so much because I've lived it, and I thought we were a tremendous company and great people even before we did this.
Mm-hmm.
But this filter, this process, this journey of purpose, culture, clarity, and creativity really brought us together in a way. And I think it can happen to other companies and organizations, even in
Sure.
communities. I think it can happen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious. So, did this process result in like different product or service offerings, or was it more of a, okay, we really understand our why and we're really all here on the same page so that we're, really focusing in on our core product in a different way?
It the if I told this story a lot of people would believe that the logical outcome of this is you launched a new product line
Right.
and you did different products than before.
Mhm.
But as you're suggesting, that is not where the change was.
Yeah.
Certainly there was a change in our messaging.
Mhm.
There was a change in our engagement with
Mhm.
consumers, a different engagement with parents
Mhm.
than we might have had before in terms of our messaging and
Mhm.
understanding what was important to them and what was best and important for their kids, for their future. But it really was a situation where we engaged differently with not our consumers, but maybe our customers. We were more focused
Uh-huh.
with our customers. We were
Mhm.
bringing more insights to our customers, more so than a price list and a bunch of samples.
Right.
So we became more focused with customers. And even internally, I think the biggest change was the way we collaborated and worked with one another internally and with our parent company over in Germany as
Mhm.
well. So
Mhm.
the internal piece of it was probably more powerful of a change or pivot, as you say, than even the product piece of it, which many people would have felt that would have been the natural outcome of all this, is you
Mhm.
had some new product line.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fascinating. It brings to mind, I don't know if you're familiar with the Anderson and Adams work on leadership. They created the Leadership Circle Profile 360 assessment, which I work with
Yeah,
quite a bit. But they have a sort of mantra, which is the inner game runs the outer game,
yeah,
right? And that seems to be a
absolutely.
perfect example.
That Melinda, that is exactly what that is.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, this has been so much fun, Jamie. Thank you so much. Anything before we conclude? Anything else you want to add, or love to hear what
Just
you're sort of up to at the moment?
yeah, the other thing
Yeah.
that the company that I've started to really help companies, as I said, it doesn't have to be a company; it can certainly be an individual.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with universities and also communities. Is this idea of the four accelerants? So the name of the
Yeah.
company is For the Win,
Okay.
and For the Win
Great.
stands for those four.
Uh-huh.
So it's those four accelerants. So that's a pretty large part of the work that I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
The other part, though, is and it's kind of the volunteer work that I'm doing, is with a group that has been started within the toy industry, and that group is called Mesh Helps. So it's
Hmm.
MESH, Mesh Helps. And Mesh Helps is designed to help improve the mental, emotional, and social health of
Mm.
children, and to do
Great.
that through play.
Great.
So, this
Great.
idea that we can help children become more resilient, and we can do that through different types of play.
Yes.
Those types of play build those skills, and those skills improve children's resilience. And the more resilient they are, the greater their outcomes in terms of navigating mental, emotional, and social health environments.
Yeah.
So Mesh is
Wonderful.
a kind of an endeavor that there's a group of us working on that through the toy industry, and I think it's really important. And I think there's definitely a role that play has within this. And you've probably seen over the last few days um, the new book by Jonathan Haidt that is The Anxious Generation. In that
Yes.
book, he points out the critical importance of play. So it really is kind of a dovetail into the work that we're doing in using play to help improve and bolster children's mental health.
That's wonderful because, yeah, we spend so much time on our digital
Yeah,
devices and kids are on them all the time. And certainly there can be aspects of play in that, but kind of the old school, you know,
yeah.
play, because play is so important developmentally in so many ways. So,
And we've so fallen away from it. And I think it's something that, in whatever way we can, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a certain toy, it's just a play pattern or a play activity.
yeah.
That I think if we get back to that, I think we'll have taken a major step forward in terms of addressing this mental health issue that we're facing right now.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, that sounds like an awesome effort. So, for our creativity pro tip today, I encourage you to really consider whether this is in your own personal creative work or in a professional or leadership context, to really think about these four accelerators that Jamie talked about: purpose, culture, creativity, and clarity, and see how you might begin to think more intentionally about these and see what results might arise. And so how can people find you and connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, but I also have my website, which is for the w.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me under Jamie Gallagher that way. My website, I have a Facebook page that is also for the W.
Great.
But please reach out. I know this is true when you and I met a little bit ago in Florida, but we are all in this together, as we would say. And the tough part is the implementation and execution, but we're all in it together. And the more we stick together, the greater traction we're going to have.
Yeah. And just back to that spirit of collaboration, the more we find and connect with each other, and then, so many wonderful kind of synergies and efforts are born out of that. And I just really appreciated meeting you at the conference and your willingness to come on the show and say, hey, connect with me. Let's talk,
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to you as well. Also for the work that you're doing, for the information and the really interesting people that you're bringing onto these podcasts and sharing. So it's a huge asset, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's really, it's a labor of love for sure. So
it seems that way, given the energy that you bring to it. I'm sure you love it.
Yeah. And at Syncreate, we're here to support your creative endeavors. So if you have an idea for a project or a new venture, please reach out to us for one-on-one coaching or join our 6-month creativity coaching group starting in July. We'll be walking you through the Syncreate model of play, plan, and produce so you can get from start to finish on your own creative work. And we're on line at syncreate.org, all the podcast channels. We're on social media, so find us and connect. We're recording today at Record ATX Studios in Austin, and the podcast is produced in collaboration with Mike Osborne at 14th Street Studios. Thanks so much for being with us, and see you next time.